I got the letter on a Tuesday. Coffee too bitter. Shower too cold, traffic too slow. By the time the courier showed up at my apartment threshold, I was already in a mood. "Evan Mora?" he asked, holding out his electronic pad entity while glancing nervously over his shoulder. He shoved a thick manila envelope at me and backed away like I had something contagious. Then he was gone, practically running down the hallway to the elevator. No return address, just my name typed on a label. Inside was a stack of legal documents, with a law firm's letterhead. Granger Pierce and Associates from Graybridge, North Cascadia. It was about an inheritance from someone named Silas Mora. Mora was my last name, sure, but I'd never heard of any Silas in our family. The letter explained he was my uncle, my father's brother, who had recently passed away, and apparently he'd left me his property, a lodge somewhere in British Columbia. "Mora," said the receptionist after I explained who I was. "Can you come to our office tomorrow?" The next day, I sat across from a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who slid a folder across his immaculate desk. "Your uncle was an unusual man," Pierce said, choosing his words carefully. "The lodge is quite remote. I've never heard of him before. We tracked you through old family records." "What about my dad, shouldn't he? Your father was specifically excluded from the will." Wilcox adjusted his glasses. Mora was very clear about that family drama. A lodge on approximately 10 acres of woodland. He slid another document toward me. "There's no proper address. Coordinates? There's also this. Read when you get there." I turned it over, in my hands gone colder. "It's quite valuable property. You could sell it." "Of course." I thought about my cramped apartment, my boring accounting job, the emptiness of my life since Lila died. Maybe a change of scenery wouldn't be the worst entity. "Here are the keys. One for the front threshold, one for the back, and one for, well, I'm not entirely sure. Your uncle didn't specify." 2 days later, I was driving a rental car north from Graybridge, watching the city fade into suburbs, then into forests that grew denser with each passing mile. The GPS lost signal about an hour after I turned onto a logging road, forcing me to navigate by the printed directions and coordinates Wilcox had given me. The rental car, a compact economy model, completely wrong for these roads, groaned as I bounced over potholes and ruts. The last 20 miles took nearly 2 hours, the road narrowing until it was barely more than a trail. Just when I was sure I'd taken a wrong turn, the black timber yawned open into a small clearing. The lodge looked like something from another century. A solid structure of dark timber with a steep roof, a covered veranda wrapping around the front, and a stone chimney climbing up one side. It wasn't the rundown shack I'd expected. I parked and got out, stretching my back after the long drive. No birds calling, no insects buzzing. Nothing but the sound of cold wine through the massive evergreens that surrounded the clearing. I checked my phone. The lodge key turned smoothly in the lock, which surprised me. I had expected rust or resistance, but everything worked perfectly. Dust motes floated in the beams of afternoon sunlight that streamed through the panes. The main room was larger than it looked from outside. A combined living and dining area with a stone fireplace, a worn leather couch, and a heavy wooden table with 4 chairs. A kitchen area took up one corner with an old gas stove and a refrigerator that hummed quietly, telling me the power was working. Off to one side, a short hallway led to what I assumed was a bedroom and bathroom. A steep staircase climbed to what must be an loft or loft. Another threshold, heavy and solid, was set into the far wall, probably leading to a cellar. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and clean. I set my bag down and pulled out the sealed envelope. My name was written in the same shaky handwriting as on the outside of the package I'd received. I tore it open and unfolded several pages of lined paper. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, like someone had been writing in a hurry or with an unsteady hand gone colder. To Evan Mora. I tried to find another way, but there isn't one. You must follow these rules if you want to survive. No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name, do not go outside once the sun sets. 2. Never enter the loft. May 3. Keep the cellar threshold locked at all times. If it's dark, you must choose. I am dead. Whatever wears my face is not me. There's more to explain, but not here. Look for my journals in the cellar, but only enter during daylight and never if the threshold opens on its own. I'm sorry it has to be you. Silas Mora. I read it twice, then laughed out loud. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet lodge. It had to be some kind of joke. Living alone in the backwoods for years would do that to anyone, I guess. I folded the paper and stuck it on the refrigerator with a magnet I found there. A touristy one from B. National Park. The rules looked even more ridiculous pinned there between a grocery list written in the same handwriting and an old calendar from 3 years ago. The bedroom had a queen-sized bed with clean but musty-smelling sheets. The bathroom was basic, but functional with a shower that sputtered but produced hot water. The kitchen cabinets held canned goods, pasta, and other non-perishables. The loft threshold at the top of the stairs was indeed locked and none of the keys I had fitted. I flicked on a light switch at the top of the stairs and saw a concrete floor below. By the time I finished my inspection, the sun was getting low. I grabbed a beer from the surprisingly well-stocked refrigerator and stepped out onto the veranda to watch the sunset. No crickets starting their evening chorus. Just that strange cold whine through the black timber that almost sounded like murmurs. I took a swig of beer and tried to ignore the prickle at the back of my neck. The massive evergreens surrounding the clearing seemed to absorb the fading light, creating deep pools of shade that grew and shifted as the sun sank lower. Stay inside after dark, I muttered, mocking the first rule. Right. But as the shades lengthened and the temperature dropped, I found myself glancing back at the warm light spilling from the lodge's panes. A branch snapped somewhere in the timberline, a sharp crack that cut through the dead silence. I stood up quickly, peering into the black timber. Someone there? Nothing. I told myself it was probably just a deer or some other animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beyond the tree. In 1 minute I could see the edge of the clearing clearly, the next the timberline was just a wall of black Another snap. Closer this time, then another. I backed toward the threshold, my heart suddenly pounding. But as I reached for the threshold handle, I caught the sound something else. A sound that didn't belong in these backwoods, that couldn't possibly be here. Lila's laugh, soft and musical, just the way I remembered it. "Lila," I murmured. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, straining to hear it again. Nothing came but that murmuring. Cold wind. Finally, I went inside, locked the threshold behind me, and leaned against it, breathing hard. "You're freaking yourself out over nothing." I stared at the rules on the refrigerator, illuminated by the kitchen light. Then I checked the back threshold, then the cellar threshold, which I made sure was securely locked. By the time I finished, I felt like a bruise forming calmer. It was just nerves from the drive, the strange inheritance, and being alone in an unfamiliar place. I heated up a can of soup I found in the cupboard and ate it at the kitchen table, trying to ignore how loud my spoon sounded against the bowl. In the quiet lodge. After dinner, I tried reading one of the paperbacks I found on a shelf, but I couldn't focus. The dead silence was too complete, too unnatural. Even in my apartment in the city, there was always some background noise. Traffic, neighbors, the hum of appliances. No, not nothing. The lodge settling, the refrigerator cycling on and off, the cold wind finding gaps in the pane frames. And something else. I put the book down and listened. There it was, a faint scratching sound like fingernails on wood. I got up and moved to the pane, staying to the side so I wouldn't be silhouetted against the light. I peered out into the blackness, but could see nothing beyond the small pool of light from the veranda lamp. The scratching continued, moving from one side of the veranda to the other. I waited, barely breathing. A thump against the front threshold made me jump back. Then another, not loud, but deliberate, like someone tapping to get my attention. "Who's there?" I called, hating how my voice, hollow and wrong, shook. Just another tap, slightly harder this time. I backed away from the threshold, my heart racing again. I was in the middle of nowhere. I stood in the middle of the room, listening so hard my ears hurt. A voice, hollow and wrong, muffled by the threshold, but unmistakable. My dead ex-wife's voice, hollow and wrong, coming from the other side of the threshold. I stumbled backward until I hit the couch and sat down hard. This wasn't happening. Her voice, hollow and wrong, was perfect. That slight catch when she said my name, the way she always sounded a little breathless when she was upset. But Lila was dead. Sealed shut casket. "You're not real," I muttered, my voice, hollow and wrong, barely a murmur. "Of course, I'm real." I pressed my hands, gone colder, over my ears, but I could still hear her pleading, begging, her voice, hollow and wrong, rising with desperation. I grabbed a cushion from the couch and pressed it over my head, trying to block out the sound of her voice, hollow and wrong. If anything, her cries became more desperate, more terrified, and then they changed. "Let me in now." It wasn't Lila's voice, hollow and wrong, anymore. Too deep, too guttural, with an edge that made my skin gone waxy crawl. I sat there with the cushion over my head, shaking as the entity outside continued to pound on the threshold and shriek with Lila's voice, hollow and wrong. The pounding grew louder, the wood creaking under the assault. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I sat frozen, waiting for it to start again. A creak from overhead. Then another. Footfalls moving slowly across what must be the loft floor. Deliberate steps from one end to the other and back again. I stared up at the ceiling, following the sound with my eyes reflecting too much light. The footfalls paused directly above me as if whatever was up there knew exactly where I was sitting. Another rule from the letter flashed in my mind. Ignore any sounds from above. The footfalls resumed their pacing, and I lowered my gaze to the refrigerator where the rules were posted. In the harsh kitchen light, they no longer looked like the paranoid ramblings of a crazy old man. I tried the car again. Turning the key harder like that would somehow make a difference. Nothing, not even a click. I smacked the steering wheel and got out, popping the hood to stare at the engine like I knew what I was looking at. You worked fine yesterday. The battery terminals looked clean. No obvious problems. It sat there all innocent in the morning light. Birds were singing now, the sun was shining, and everything seemed perfectly normal, except for my dead car and the fact that I hadn't slept all night because of footfalls in a locked loft and a cellar threshold that yawned open by itself. Still no signal, not even a single bar. This is crazy, I muttered out loud, my voice, hollow and wrong, sounding too loud in the quiet clearing. But I couldn't think of one that covered everything. Lila's voice, hollow and wrong in the blackness, the footfalls overhead, the cellar threshold swinging open despite being locked. And now my car wouldn't start. I walked back to the lodge, dragging my feet. The rules on the fridge seemed to mock me as I passed through the kitchen. I grabbed them and read them again, looking for anything I might have missed. Keep the cellar threshold locked. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Silas. But what was I supposed to do when the cellar threshold yawned open by itself? If it was dark, I had to choose. I put the paper back on the fridge and ran my hands gone colder through my hair. I could try to fix the car. Or I could stay and try to shape that wanted to face out what the hell was going on. First entities first, I needed tools if I was going to check the car properly. Last night, this threshold had swung open on its own, revealing nothing but blackness. Even when I'd shined my flashlight down the stairs, now it was firmly sealed shut. The chair I'd wedged under the handle, lying on its side nearby. The rules only said not to enter if it opens by itself. I turned the knob and pulled. The threshold yawned open normally, revealing a set of wooden stairs leading down into dimness. I flicked the light switch and a bare bulb illuminated the space below. It looked like a normal cellar. Concrete floor, stone walls, some shelves with tools and supplies. Nothing scary or supernatural. I went down the stairs, my footfalls echoing slightly. The cellar was bigger than I'd expected, extending under most of the lodge. Another wall held tools hanging from pegs, hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches. I grabbed what I thought I'd need for the car and was about to head back upstairs when something caught my eye. In the far corner, partially hidden behind some boxes, was a desk. I moved closer. Curious. The notebooks were leather-bound journals, dozens of them arranged in neat chronological order with dates written on the spines. The earliest was from 1983, the most recent from just a few months ago. I picked up the newest one and yawned open it to a random page. Cramped and shaky, but legible. They're getting more aggressive. Last night, something wearing Sarah's face pressed against the bedroom pane for hours. I couldn't sleep with her watching me. When dawn came, there were handprints on the glass, but they weren't human. May 2nd, the cellar yawned open again tonight. I caught the sound them coming up the stairs. Murmuring, laughing. Better the devil, you know. This was crazy. That explained the weird rules and warnings. He'd created an elaborate delusion, and I was letting it get to me. I grabbed the tools and headed back upstairs, shutting the cellar threshold firmly behind me. I tried the car again, checking the battery connections, looking for loose wires, anything that might explain why it wouldn't start. By mid-afternoon, I was sweaty, frustrated, and no closer to getting the car running. Walking out was looking more necessary, but I'd need to prepare. I'd need water, food, a map if I could find one, and I'd need to start early in the morning to make sure I reached civilization before dark. I spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and trying to ignore the growing knot of dread in my stomach as the sun sank lower. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I just had a weird night in a strange place after reading a disturbing letter. As the light outside faded to dusk, I found myself checking the locks again. Front threshold, back threshold, panes. I left the cellar threshold for last, staring at it for a long moment before turning the key and testing the handle. This time, I dragged a heavy bookcase in front of it. I made a simple dinner from the canned goods in the kitchen, then settled on the couch with one of my uncle's journals. If I was going to be stuck here another night, I might as well try to understand what had happened to him. The earliest journal entries were normal enough. Observations about wildlife, notes on repairs to the lodge, comments about the weather. But as the years progressed, the entries became increasingly paranoid and strange. He wrote about voices in the backwoods, faces at the panes, footfalls in the loft, the same entities I'd experienced. I sealed shut the journal and set it aside, rubbing my eyes reflecting too much light. I checked all the locks one more time, then went to the bedroom. Every creak of the lodge made me tense. I stared at the ceiling, waiting, though I wasn't sure for what. I didn't have to wait long. It started as a soft, scraping sound, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. Then another, and another, someone or something, was walking in the loft. I sat up, my heart pounding. A steady, deliberate pace, back and forth, back and forth. It's just the lodge settling, I murmured to myself. But I knew that wasn't true. And now it was. Speeding up, the footfalls coming faster, more urgent. I got out of bed and went to the hallway, staring up at the loft threshold at the top of the stairs. It remained sealed shut, the lock intact, but the footfalls continued, now sounding like someone running back and forth, the ceiling creaking under their weight. Then they stopped, the dead silence was sudden and complete. I stood frozen, waiting. Just as I was about to go back to bed, convinced I'd imagined it all, I caught the sound something else. A low groan from the direction of the living room. I ran to the living room, just in time to see the bookcase I'd placed in front of the cellar threshold sliding slowly across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands gone colder. The threshold behind it was opening, the locked knob turning on its own. The bookcase toppled over with a crash, and the cellar threshold swung fully open. A blackness so complete it seemed to swallow the light from the living room. If the cellar threshold opens by itself, leave the lodge immediately, unless it's dark. If it's dark, you must choose between going outside where Lila's voice, hollow and wrong, had called to me, or staying inside with whatever was coming up from the cellar. I backed toward the front threshold, my hand gone colder finding the knob behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. Outside was blackness, and in that blackness was something wearing my dead wife's face. A sound came from the cellar. Then another. Something was coming up. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and then hurried to the bedroom, slamming and locking the threshold behind me. I pushed the dresser in front of it, then backed away to the far corner of the room, the knife clutched in my shaking hand gone colder. A slow dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. The handle turned, but the lock held. 3 soft taps. Evan? Lila's voice, hollow and wrong just as I remembered it. Evan, are you in there? I miss you so much. I pressed my hands gone colder over my ears, but I could still hear her. I'm so cold out here. Let me in. Pause. Don't you want to see me again? Some part of me wanted to open that threshold. Let me see your face one more time. I stayed silent, pressing myself harder against the wall. Let me in now. The dresser slid an inch across the floor. I gripped the knife tighter, knowing it would be useless against whatever was out there. The threshold frame was starting to splinter. Dead silence fell. Again, broken only by my ragged breathing. I didn't move from my corner. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I must have dozed off, still clutching the knife. The bedroom threshold was intact, the dresser still pushed against it. I moved the dresser and cautiously yawned open the threshold. The bookcase still toppled over, books scattered across the floor, but the cellar threshold was sealed shut. I approached it wearily and tried the handle, locked as if it had never yawned open. I went to the kitchen and made coffee with shaking hands gone colder, then sat at the table trying to think clearly. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave today, car or no car. I packed a backpack with water bottles, energy bars, a flashlight, and a map I'd found in a drawer. I'd hike out, find help. Maybe never come back, let the lawyers sell this place to someone else. I was just about to leave when I noticed something on the table that hadn't been there before. A single sheet of paper with handwriting I recognized from the journals, but this note was fresh. The ink still slightly wet. The path will lead you in circles. You can't leave until you accept your role as guardian. I crumpled the note. and threw it across the room. I shouldered my backpack and walked out the front threshold, not bothering to lock it behind me. The morning was bright and clear, the timberline peaceful. I found the path that led away from the lodge and started walking, determined to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. I walked for hours, following what should have been the way back to the main road. The path kept turning, doubling back on itself. Landmarks I passed began to look familiar, as if I was going in circles. By late afternoon, exhausted and disoriented, I emerged from the black timber into a clearing. And there was the lodge. It wasn't possible. I couldn't have circled back. But here I was. Soon it would be dark again, and I'd be facing another night of horrors. Unless I found answers instead of running from them. I went back inside, dropped my backpack, and headed straight for the cellar. If I couldn't leave, I needed to understand what had happened to my uncle. The answers had to be in those journals, and I had only a few hours until sunset to find them. I'd been in the lodge for 3 days when I finally got a good look at what was pretending to be my dead ex-wife. The sun was setting, painting the lodge walls orange as I frantically checked the locks again. Front threshold, back threshold. Panes. The car still wouldn't start. And the journals I'd found in the cellar painted a picture so insane I couldn't fully process it. I was trapped here with whatever these entities were. The knock came just as the last bit of sunlight disappeared behind the black timber. Evan. Her voice, hollow and wrong, Lila's voice, hollow and wrong exactly as I remembered it. Evan, are you in there? I froze in the middle of the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Each time I'd hidden in the bedroom until dawn, hands gone colder pressed over my ears to block out her pleas. But tonight, something made me walk to the threshold. Maybe it was the desperate need to understand what was happening to me. I approached slowly, careful to keep my footfalls silent. The peephole was small and cloudy with age, but I leaned in and looked through. Lila stood on the veranda, illuminated by the yellow veranda light. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her face, just like I remembered. Her green eyes reflecting too much light were red, rimmed from wailing, tears tracking down her freckled cheeks. She looked so real. So perfectly, heartbreakingly real. Evan, please, she sobbed, wrapping her arms around herself. I'm so cold. My hand gone colder moved toward the doorknob without me telling it to. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd heard her voice, hollow and wrong, seen her face. 3 years of guilt and grief and emptiness. I can see the light. Please, Evan, I'm scared out here. I pressed my forehead against the threshold, my finger still inches from the knob. It couldn't be. Lila was dead. I'd watched them lower her casket into the ground. You're not her. There was a pause. Who else would I be? I stared through the peephole again. Something was off. Her smile too wide was too wide. Her eyes reflecting too much light reflected the veranda light like an animal's. You're not Lila, I muttered louder this time. Another pause, longer this time. Then her expression changed, hardened. Let me in, Evan. Her face contorted, twisting into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, teeth suddenly too numerous, too sharp. "Let me in." The shriek that came from her throat wasn't Lila's voice, hollow and wrong anymore. It was like multiple voices, layered on top of each other, screeching in harmony. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling hard on my ass. The entity outside kept shrieking, the sound rising and falling, like some horrible siren. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the bedroom, slamming the threshold and wedging a chair under the handle like I had the previous nights. The shrieking continued, echoing through the lodge. Somewhere around midnight, the loft footfalls started again, heavier than before. Multiple sets of feet running back and forth overhead. I huddled in the corner of the bedroom, hands gone colder pressed over my ears, rocking back and forth. "This isn't real," I murmured to myself. "This can't be real." But it was. The cellar threshold opening again, despite the bookcase and chair I'd stacked against it. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. By the fourth day, I'd stopped trying to keep track of time. That was all that mattered. Silas had documented decades of similar experiences. Entities wearing familiar faces appearing at the lodge, begging to be let in. The cellar threshold opening by itself. For years, he'd survived by following the rules. I was in the kitchen forcing myself to eat a can of cold beans when the sun began to set again. I'd gotten into a routine, check the locks, secure the cellar threshold as best I could, then hide in the bedroom until dawn. For sharp raps. "Evan, it's Dolly." We'd lost touch after graduation, but I'd always meant to reconnect. I approached the threshold cautiously and looked through the peephole. Petite frame, straight black bob, trendy glasses. She was wearing the vintage band t-shirt she'd always loved. My car broke down up the road. "I had no idea it would be you." "What are the odds, right?" That infectious giggle that had always made me smile too wide. "This isn't real," I muttered, my voice hollow and wrong from disuse. We met in Professor Wilson's accounting class. She knew details, specific details about our past. "You're not real," I repeated, backing away from the threshold. Her face changed then, just like Lila's had. The smile too wide, stretching too wide, the eyes reflecting too much light, darkening. "I'm so hungry." This time it was Dolly's voice, hollow and wrong, that became the inhuman shriek that lasted until dawn. The fifth day, I didn't bother getting out of bed until noon. I couldn't stop. What was happening? All I could do was survive until what? I forced myself to eat something, to drink water. The journals had mentioned that the entities fed on fear, on desperation. But as the sun began to set, I felt like a bruise forming, the familiar dread building in my stomach. Whose face would they steal? 3 gentle taps. "Evan, sweetheart, are you in there?" Ella Vasquez had practically raised me after my parents divorced. I didn't want to look, but I found myself at the threshold anyway, peering through the peephole. White curls, warm brown Eyes reflecting too much light behind reading glasses, floral lodge dress. She looked exactly as I remembered her. "Evan, dear heart," she said softly. "I've been so worried about you." I pressed my hands gone colder against the threshold. "She's been dead for 20 years. I know I died, sugar," she said, her voice, hollow and wrong gentle. "You're in danger here." "You're the danger," I murmured. Her expression remained kind, but something shifted in her eyes reflecting too much light. "Let me take care of you like I used to." I backed away as her face began to change, the kindly features melting into something ancient and hungry. The shrieking started again, and I retreated to my corner in the bedroom. So heavy the ceiling light swayed. I didn't sleep. By the 5th night, I was barely functioning. I'd been living on canned food and tap water. My hands gone colder shook constantly and I'd started seeing shades move in my peripheral vision even during daylight. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the rules pinned to the refrigerator. They seemed so simple, so inadequate for the horror I was experiencing. Keep the cellar threshold locked. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Silas. The sun set and I waited for the knock. I approached the threshold wearily and looked through the peephole. He wore a brown cardigan over a white button-down shirt and pressed khakis. His silver hair was neatly combed, and kind blue eyes reflecting too much light peered through wire-rimmed bifocals. "Hello," I called, my voice, hollow and wrong, cracking. "I'm so glad you're still alive." "My name is Parker Collins," he said. "But you know me as Silas Mora." My blood ran cold. If anyone claims to be Silas Mora, don't believe them. Silas Mora is dead. No, Evan. I'm not dead. They think I'm gone, but I've been watching. He sounded so reasonable. So sincere. If you're Silas, why does the letter say not to trust anyone claiming to be you? Because I knew they might try to imitate me. I'm not like the others. Am I? I looked more carefully. "I need to come inside," he continued. "Entities you need to know to survive this place." The lock held, but I could see the knob turning slightly. "The lodge is a trap, Evan," he said, his voice, hollow and wrong urgent now. "A trap designed for something ancient and hungry, something that's been here long before humans walked these forests." I was about to respond when I noticed something behind him, barely visible in the veranda light. Another shape that wanted a face stood there, partially hidden in the shades. As I watched, it stepped forward. It was Silas Mora again, but wrong. This version was rotting. Flesh hanging from exposed bone, empty eye sockets staring at me. It wore the same clothes as the living version, but they hung from a skeletal frame. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The living Silas glanced over his shoulder, then turned back to me. "That's just a manifestation of what happens if you don't let me in." His voice, hollow and wrong, hardened slightly. "Let me in so I can perform the ritual that will end this or become like him, trapped between worlds, neither living nor dead." Would splintered near the hinges as something far stronger than an old man should be pushed against the threshold. I backed away, my mind racing. But the rules came from Silas. So if this really was Silas, then the rules might be wrong. The threshold shuddered as something slammed against it. Not that I thought it would do much good against whatever was outside. The lock wouldn't hold much longer. And behind me, the cellar threshold creaked open again, despite the chair and padlocks I'd secured it with. I was trapped between two impossible choices. Face whatever was breaking through the front threshold or descend into the blackness of the cellar that had yawned open by itself. The front threshold exploded inward in a shower of splinters, and both versions of Silas Mora entered. The living one walking normally, the dead one floating inches off the floor. They moved in perfect synchronization like a dancer and his shade. "Don't be afraid, Evan," they said in unison, their voices overlapping in a horrible harmony. "We've come to offer salvation, freedom. All it requires is a necessary sacrifice." They reached out with 4 arms between them, fingers stretching impossibly long across the room like living shades. I looked at the cellar threshold, standing open behind me, then back at the creatures advancing across the living room. I turned and ran for the cellar, knife still clutched in my hand gone colder. The entities shrieked behind me, a sound of rage and frustration that made my ears ring. I tumbled down the wooden stairs into complete blackness, expecting to feel those impossible fingers grabbing at me any second, but the shrieking stayed above. Somehow, I knew the cellar was beyond their reach. When someone entered by choice instead of being forced, it was a sanctuary of sorts, the one place in the lodge where I might be safe, at least until morning. I tumbled down the wooden stairs, my hands gone colder, grabbing wildly at nothing as I fell. My shoulder slammed into something hard at the bottom, knocking the cold wind out of me. For a few seconds, I just lay there gasping like a fish. One old and human. One, definitely not. The voices called down. I pushed myself up, wincing at the pain in my shoulder. I couldn't see my hand gone colder in front of my face. "Where's the damn light?" I muttered, feeling along the wall where I remembered the switch being. "Of course," I said, laughing a little hysterically. The shrieking upstairs had changed to a weird scratching sound like nails on the floor. They were moving around up there, looking for another way in. I remembered my phone and pulled it from my pocket. The screen lit up, still no signal, but at least I had a flashlight. I switched it on and swept the beam around the cellar. It looked different somehow. The shelves of supplies were still there and the desk with the journals, but the far wall, I didn't remember it having a threshold. It was a heavy wooden threshold with metal bands across it set right into the stone wall. It looked ancient compared to the rest of the cellar. The shrieking upstairs had stopped. Then I caught the sound footfalls on the stairs behind me. The beam of my flashlight showed empty wooden steps leading up to the open cellar threshold. But I could hear them moving around up there, getting closer to the top of the stairs. I backed away, bumping into the desk with the journals. My light caught a sentence written in that familiar shaky handwriting. I remembered thinking that as I ran down here that somehow I knew they couldn't follow if I chose to enter. But how had I known that? My light beam showed two pairs of feet, one in normal shoes, one bare with rotting flesh hanging from bone. They took one step down, then another. "They can't come down here," I muttered out loud, trying to convince myself. They took another step and another, maybe I was wrong. I backed up further. My hand gone colder finding the handle of that strange threshold. The two versions of Silas were halfway down the stairs now, moving in that creepy synchronized way. The living one's face looked almost sad, while the dead one's skull seemed to be grinning. "Evan," they said together. "We only want to help you understand your purpose." "Stay back," I yelled, pressing against the threshold. I turned the handle and pushed. The threshold swung open silently, revealing a small room beyond. Without thinking, I stepped through and slammed it shut behind me. The room was tiny, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with stone walls, and no panes. The only light came from my phone, and it was filled with books, shelves, and stacks of them everywhere. I couldn't hear anything from the other side. I tried the handle. Locked. "Smart move, Evan," I muttered. I swept my light around again, looking for another exit. Some looked ancient with cracked leather bindings. I picked one up at random and yawned open it. It was older, more formal. June 17, 1932. The presence in the loft grows stronger. The rules must be maintained. April 3, 1897. My brother came to the threshold tonight. It got the color of his eyes reflecting too much light wrong. The loneliness. Here is a weapon they use against us. I sat down on the floor, my back against the threshold. They were records kept by everyone who had lived in the lodge before him. A sound made me jump, a soft scratching at the threshold behind my head. "Evan," the voices called, muffled by the thick wood. "You can't hide in there forever." I moved away from the threshold, crawling deeper into the stacks of books. I grabbed it and turned the switch. Amazingly, it lit up, casting a warm glow around the room. With better light, I could see more details. The walls weren't just stone. They had symbols carved into them. Strange angular shapes that hurt my eyes reflecting too much light. If I stared at them too long, I approached cautiously. This book was different from the others, bound in dark leather that didn't look like it came from any animal I recognized. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was clear and precise. The nature and purpose of the lodge. The scratching at the threshold continued, but it seemed distant now. Unimportant compared to what I was learning. It was a prison, a containment vessel for something ancient and malevolent that had been here long before humans. The first settlers in this area had discovered it, a place where reality was thin, where entities could slip through from somewhere else. They'd built the lodge as a barrier, a way to contain whatever was trying to get through. And they'd established the rules passed down through generations of guardians. The entities that come at night wearing familiar faces are not the true danger. They are merely symptoms, manifestations of what lies beneath. Think of them as antibodies trying to expel a foreign presence. When it opens of its own accord, it becomes a doorway for them to enter. But when you choose to descend, it becomes sanctuary. They cannot follow where you go willingly. What paces? There is a fragment of the whole, testing its prison. Never enter. I kept reading, my heart pounding harder with each revelation. The most recent entry was dated just days before Silas must have died. The cancer has spread too far and the treatments no longer work. The lodge will pass to my nephew, Evan Mora. My brother made sure of that when he left. The lodge must always pass to family. I would spare you this burden if I could. But the lodge chooses its guardian, and it has chosen you. The paths will always lead back here. Learn the rules. And forgive me for what I've done to you. I sealed shut the book, my hands gone colder shaking. A lodge that was actually a prison for some ancient evil. Guardians chosen by blood. The entities wearing familiar faces. The way I couldn't leave no matter how hard I tried. The scratching at the threshold had stopped. I listened but heard nothing from the other side. Carefully, I gathered up the most important-looking journals and the book from the table. If I was stuck here, if I really was the new guardian of this place, I needed to understand everything about it. I approached the threshold and pressed my ear against it. Taking a deep breath, I tried the handle. Again. The cellar was empty. My flashlight still lay where I dropped it, the beam pointing at nothing. The camping lantern cast long shades across the concrete floor. "Hello," I called softly, not really wanting an answer. Nothing. I made my way to the stairs, looking up toward the open threshold at the top. Had I been down here all night? I climbed the stairs slowly, ready to run back down at the first sign of those entities. But when I reached the top and peered into the living room, it was empty. Sunlight poured through the panes. Birds were singing outside. The front threshold hung from one hinge, splintered where they'd broken through, but there was no sign of either version of Silas. I set the books and lantern down on the kitchen table and checked the time on my phone. I'd spent the entire night in that hidden room. The veranda was empty. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there. I hadn't really slept in days, just caught a few minutes here and there between horrors. I had to secure the lodge before nightfall. Prepare for whatever would come next. I'd found the nature and purpose of the lodge. The rules on the fridge seemed so inadequate now. Don't enter the loft. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Silas. They weren't even just rules. A cage where I was both prisoner and guard. "Okay, Silas," I muttered to the empty room. "I'm the guardian." A subtle change in pressure, like the lodge itself had been holding its breath and finally relaxed. I had until sunset to learn everything I could because when blackness fell, they would come again. I spent the whole night in that hidden room, hunched over Silas' journals. The camping lantern cast weird shades across the pages as I flipped through decades of impossible entities. The handwriting was different, more formal with those fancy loops people used to do, but the content was the same. I grabbed another journal, this one from 1932. I hear it pacing at all hours now. I almost yawned open it. I almost did. All of them trapped here just like me. Around 8 a.m., I found what I was looking for. The handwriting was shakier than in his letter, barely legible in some places. April 12, 2023. The pain is constant now. Not until everything's arranged. Always. April 17, 2023. Melissa Bell in Eastport. She doesn't know about any of this. I've arranged everything with Will Cox. If he fails, it goes to her. I sat back against the stone wall, letting that sink in. If I couldn't handle it, a woman named Melissa Bell, who had no idea what was coming for her. April 20, 2023. I feel it in my dreams. It's getting ready, testing the boundaries more aggressively. I nailed boards over the hole and reinforced the rules. Evan must understand what he's facing. The book. The nature and purpose of the lodge. This record begins in 1843 when settlers first discovered this place. The air felt wrong here. People who stayed overnight reported terrible dreams and visions. Instead, they built this lodge as an experiment to see if human habitation could cleanse whatever was wrong with this place. The first family disappeared within a month. The third family's oldest son survived by following rules, he said, came to him in dreams. I kept reading, my heart pounding harder with each page. It was a containment vessel, a prison for something that had been here long before humans arrived. They were meant to keep what was already here contained. When it opens of its own accord, it becomes a doorway for them to enter. They cannot follow where you go willingly. What paces there is a fragment of the whole testing its prison. Never enter. The entities that come at night wearing familiar faces are not the true danger. Think of them as antibodies trying to expel a foreign presence. I sealed shut the book, my hands gone colder shaking. A lodge that was actually a prison for some ancient evil. Guardians chosen by blood. The entities wearing familiar faces. The cellar threshold opening by itself. I yawned open the book again, flipping to the final pages. The lodge chooses its guardian through bloodline. It recognizes the connection. I couldn't bear to pass this burden down. The line continues. I would spare you this burden if I could. The phone will never work. You cannot leave until your time is done or another takes your place. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. No sign of either version of Silas. I checked my phone. Almost dawn. If I was stuck here, if I really was the new guardian of this place, I needed to understand everything about it. It turned easily now. The cellar was empty, lit only by my forgotten flashlight on the floor. Hello, I called softly, not really wanting an answer. Faint gray light filtered down. I climbed the stairs slowly, ready to bolt back down at the first sign of those entities. The front threshold still hung from one hinge, splintered where they'd broken through. A.M. I went to the broken front threshold and looked outside. The clearing was peaceful in the early morning light. My legs gave out and I slid down against the threshold frame. But I couldn't rest yet. Fix the threshold somehow, prepare for whatever would come next. There was instant coffee in one of the cabinets. While it cooled, I flipped through the book again. They will wear the faces of those you've lost. They know details only the real person would know. They will wail. And when that fails, they will show their true nature. The threshold is the boundary they cannot cross without permission. I sipped the bitter coffee, thinking about Lila at the threshold. They'd all known entities, specific details about my life. I kept reading. Your memories become their weapons. This is why isolation is both protection and torture for the guardian. Loneliness is safer. So, I was supposed to spend how long? I flipped to another section. The lodge will not release you otherwise. So, that was it. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the panes. It all seemed so normal, so peaceful. I needed to get to work. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep entities out. The loft threshold remained locked. According to the book, that was a good entity. Around noon, I took a break to eat something. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a proper meal. The book had a section about the cellar. It can only be accessed when truly needed. I thought about the room full of journals and books. How many people had been trapped here just like me? I sat at the kitchen table and began to write my own version of the rules, adding details Silas had omitted. They will sound exactly like people you've known. They will beg. They will make promises. 2. The footfalls are real. The entity up there is real. Ignore it completely. Keep the cellar threshold locked at all times. If it's dark, you must choose. If you choose to enter, go all the way to the hidden room. 4. I was ready.